If you haven't been living under a rock recently, then you've probably heard about the carnivore diet. It has lots of polarizing people who are the leaders of the community, and they often make some pretty big claims. Or maybe you have a family member who's on the diet, then you're worried about them. Or maybe you eat the carnivore diet and you're annoyed by your family member who won't stop bugging you to stop. Either way, in today's episode, we're going to try to talk and explain both sides of the diet and help everyone have a better understanding of the situation. So let's get started. First things first, what is the carnivore diet? The carnivore diet is essentially just meat. Or some people say it's an animal-based diet. So traditionally, originally, the OG carnivore was like just straight up meat. Any type of meat, that's it. That's what you can eat. And they've kind of progressed now. A lot of people in the carnivore community are now what they call a meat or animal-based diet, meaning they can have other things. But just like it sounds, usually it's just consisting of meat, specifically lots of red meat, as most people think that that's more filling than traditionally chicken, but you can have chicken on this as well. And like I mentioned, there are some subcategories of it, which calls into the kind of the category of animal-based, which includes things like honey, raw milk, eggs, and some people even now are eating fruit as carbohydrates. But I mean, let's be honest, that's not carnivore. Like, if someone says they're on a carnivore diet and they're eating fruit, like, dude, you're not on a carnivore diet. That's just first and foremost. Maybe they say put it off as, quote, animal based, but last I checked, no animals producing fruit. So either way, they're all in that spectrum of, predominantly red meat, lots of animal based products. So that's like kind of what we're thinking. And this is kind of the new trend, right? But in reality, there's nothing new in the diet world. And what's old is new again. Carnivore is essentially the newest trend, but this is not the first time something like this has happened, right? And you think about a couple years ago, keto rocked the whole world. And before that, though, was the Atkins diet. And so this is just the newest flipping the status quo diet, that we've seen before. And I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but this is not the first time where people have come and said, hey, we're completely shifting the paradigm, going to this low carbohydrate diet. We've seen it with Atkins. We've seen it with keto. And so that's definitely something we've seen. And what's different with this, though, is, in my opinion, this is the first diet that I can remember that has been fueled by short form content. Previously, if you think about it back in the day in keto, that kind of came out early, like blogosphere days, where you had blogs and maybe some longer form videos. But now, like carnivore, we have these shorts, we have TikToks, we have, reels, anything like that. It's just exploding. So it seems like it is everywhere because of social media, but it's still very, very much a small segment of people. So, depending on where you are and what the algorithm feeds you, some people might think that this is everywhere, right? But this is certainly not everywhere. This is a very small segment of people, but is very clearly having an impact on a lot of people. And so that's why I want to talk about it today, because it's super important. And first things first is, why are people doing this? Well, first thing, there are a lot of amazing testimonials. There are so many people who are saying that this has changed their life on the diet. There's tons and tons of anecdotes. People love anecdotes. Anecdotes and stories are strong and compelling. They feel like, wow, that's awesome. But that being said, that is one of the fuels here and one of the reasons why any real diet starts up, right? People have these testimonies saying, hey, I did this worked well. And so this is not a knock on the carnivore diet, but this is why it's so strong, is people are saying I've had life-changing results. And I'm genuinely happy that people feel like they've gotten good results. And so, people report huge amounts of weight loss, they've decreased their joint pains, and overall just feel better. And some people even said that they've reversed their autoimmune conditions with the diet. And that is overall great. Once again, I want to drive home the point that I want people to feel well and have a quality life. Like, I'm all about that. So I'm not knocking it at all, but this is why it's huge. With people coming in, doing something, that's non-traditional and having success, that is something, to look into. And many people have never had this success before. A lot of these people here have tried traditional diets, right? They've tried to do it this way, do it that way, and they haven't had success with weight loss. And so they're finally having a way of losing weight, and it feels so much better. And there's no amount of evidence, even if there was any, that can take that away from someone, right? So if you've had this amazing experience and you've lost a lot of weight, it's going to be really hard to have someone convince you that what you're doing is wrong, right? Because all these traditional metrics, all these things are doing good. It feels good to be right. And it also feels good for traditional medicine to be wrong. And you're saying like, hey, I'm not the problem. It was the advice I was given was the problem. Like, that was it. And so people love being counterculture. We all do. It's all part of we love being in the know, right? We love being right and we let other people be wrong. And it's just very helpful. And it feels good when, everyone's wrong except you. You finally figured it out. It's kind of this us versus them mentality. Well, we're being right when everyone else is wrong. It's a incredibly vindicating experience. And so that is definitely something I can see on the carnivore circuit in terms of, I see it in the keto and I see it in the whole food plant-based. So I'm not saying at all, I'm not ripping one diet. This is just very like tribalism. This is who we are as humans, is we love clinging on to something and saying I'm right and everyone else is wrong. But I think this is really, really, anytime we're bucking the traditional evidence, right? Saying, hey, eating nothing but meat, like that's, the dietary pyramid and the food plate, that's not what they're recommending. And so they're saying, hey, I've had these amazing results by doing something counter-cultural. It's pretty much saying like, hey, everything they know is wrong and this is right. And we're going to dive into why I think that may not be the best attitude to have. But I think a lot of times with keto, why and carnivore, why it got so big is it just flipped traditional medicine and nutrition science on its head. And people were getting good results. And so that's why it's saying, hey, it's there. And overall, what does the science actually say about it though? Well, first things first, we have no long-term data on this diet. Everything we know about this is either extrapolated from a lot of times like keto or lower carb studies or from shorter term studies. And so that's just the first things first. There's no long epidemiologic studies looking at carnivore diets for decades on decades. That just doesn't exist. And so just always want to put that out there. The evidence base is very lacking for this, but we do know that people lose a lot of weight in this, right? From the anecdotes and people, what they're saying with their stories. But we do know that losing a lot of weight can lead to a ton of improvements, right? If you lose weight, you're going to increase, improve your blood pressure, increase your insulin sensitivity, maybe even improve some of your cholesterol metrics. All those things happen. But we have to remember that we are currently in uncharted territory with this diet. We can extrapolate some things from, like I said, the ketogenic diet, but it's still different in the composition of the diet, right? The ketogenic diet is predominantly fat-based, meaning you have high percentage of fat and, like lower moderate protein and like very, very low carbs. Whereas carnivore here has a lot more protein and, a decent amount of fat as well, but it's not necessarily the same macronutrient ratio. So we can't just extrapolate from keto to these people, although they share a lot of similarities. That's just something to mention that looking at the data, I just want to mention, we do not have a lot of long-term studies. So we're kind of extrapolating from other lower carbohydrate diets. And one thing I do want to talk about here is why is this so controversial? It kind of stems from the difference in opinion regarding the importance of LDL cholesterol, right? So if you go back, LDL cholesterol is something I've done. I did a whole podcast season on cholesterol. LDL cholesterol is a hot topic here. It's generally considered the quote unquote bad. I mean, that's very simplistic and I don't agree with that necessarily. But when you go to your doctor's office, they check your LDL. If your LDL is high, they say, hey, that's a high number. We want to get that lower. And in general, it's thought that having a higher LDL cholesterol level puts you at high risk for cardiovascular disease later in life. I recognize that there's much more nuance than that in terms of looking at apolipoprotein B, looking at a whole bunch of different things. But that's the general medical consensus that a very, very high LDL leads to potential risk for cardiovascular disease. And so that's why this is controversial, because overall, the low carb community tends to place more importance on lower triglycerides, high HDL, and normal blood sugar levels. That's like the big thing here. They're saying insulin resistance, that's a really big thing. And some people even downright ignore LDL or ApoB numbers, saying it doesn't matter at all. They tend to think that insulin resistance is the ultimate cause of cardiovascular disease. And without it, then LDL numbers don't matter because you can't have cardiovascular disease. And so that's just my interpretation of what a lot of people feel like in the low carb community, saying, hey, these numbers don't matter as long as my insulin is good, as long as my blood pressure is good, like the LDL number doesn't matter. And so that's where that's generally coming from. And I just kind of want to share my take on it. What's my overall take? Well, I think there's definitely good things to this. First is weight loss. Weight loss can't be overstated. If you do something to lose weight and can sustain that, you are going to have a lot of improvements in your health. And then we can kind of have different, nuanced conversations, but losing lots of weight in a healthy way, obviously while you're still exercising and resistance training and all that stuff, not just withering away, but losing weight when you have a lot of weight to lose is going to be very good for you. That is pretty much standard across the board. Another good thing about this is it's minimizing processed food, right? If you're just eating meats, it's not really processed. Obviously, there's lots of things you can have processed meats. That's something we still try to avoid in terms of really heavily processed foods, but they don't advocate that here, saying you should eat like tons of beef jerky and all that stuff. People do that, but overall they say minimize processed food, and then you're getting plenty of protein here. You're going to meet your daily requirements for muscle building or anything like that. The concerning things that we talk about here are the LDL cholesterol, like I mentioned, the unknown long-term effects, meaning we have no data on long-term how this is going to go, and then maybe possibly lacking either some vitamins, minerals, or fiber. Fiber is something that you get usually from animal or from plant sources like vegetables and whatnot, and they're getting pretty much none here in that. And that's also another very controversial topic. You'll notice the common theme here is lots of controversy in the carnivore community when people are saying that, once again, flipping the paradigm on its head, saying, hey, they're saying fiber is bad. They say LDL doesn't matter. They say all these things, low carb is fine. Once again, that's the general idea and position there. Whether that's entirely true, usually nothing's entirely true in terms of black and white, this is good, this is bad. And so that's another thing we'll talk about here. But that being said, that's one reason why this may not be ideal, because from that perspective. But personally for me, like, I don't care what your dietary pattern is as long as you're aware of the potential risks and benefits, right? It's the same for any intervention. If I'm giving someone an injection or giving them medication, if you're well informed and you can make a choice, I'm fine with that. I think you should always be working with someone to kind of work in conjunction. Don't just do things on your own, pull strings and say, hey, we'll see what happens. I think working with your physician is very helpful. But to me, this is not a deal breaker. I've seen physicians online who are vehemently against this, saying they wouldn't take care of these patients on the carnivore diet. And like, first things first, you're probably not going to be a good fit for that person, right? If you're saying, oh, I wouldn't take care of them, it's like, well, they're not going to want to have you as a doctor because you're not going to listen to them. But like, second of all, I don't understand where this comes from, because you don't have to agree with everything a patient does to be able to take care of them, right? Like, I guess if this were like an absolute non-negotiable, meaning like, I refuse to, this is where I draw my foot in the sand, then yeah, I could see that. But it seems like a really weird hill to die on. For my example is, if someone continues to smoke, right? You're a clinician and your patient smoking, do you just stop taking care of them because you're against it? Like, no, we're obviously all very against smoking. But if someone's still smoking, you say, okay, cool. Like, I want to take care of you, and that's just one area where I know we can improve. And whether or not, the diet is right or wrong, that's not the point. The point is, like, why are we having these conversations where like we refuse to talk to someone else because they have a different dietary opinion? Like, it's just crazy. People feel like I'm taking crazy pills. People get all up in arms about nutrition, like it's the end of the world, like it's like religion, and it's crazy. And to me, it's just, we need to have more conversation of the overlap of diets, and then work on the nuance and have conversations instead of just getting into our silos saying, hey, I'm in this camp, I'm right, you're wrong. I don't like that. For me, this is simply a form of calorie control for most people. I'm saying the caveats for most people. I think that's probably not magic, but rather a really effective way to control your calories. When you eat more protein, fat, and maybe more satiating potentially for some people, so overall it lowers their total daily intake, thus leading to lots of weight loss. And I think this is probably the biggest driver for why lots of people have success. When you're losing weight, then we are going to see improvement in lots of our numbers. There's a whole different subset of people in carnivore, the lean mass hyper responders. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about. Most people here are people who struggle with weight their whole life, and they find this thing and they lose a bunch of weight and they're feeling better. Like, that's who I'm talking to here. The lean mass hyper responders are a whole different thing. They have their own like subset of community. I have a video on that previously. But most people who are just, eating the standard American diet switch to this, and it's a huge difference, and they decrease their calories substantially. And so for me though, if my patient does have this, right, if they're on this diet and they say, hey, I want to eat the carnivore diet or keto diet, then for me, everything else has to be locked in. And when I mean has to be locked in, I mean controlling all their other risk factors, because we know that LDL is involved in heart disease. That's irrefutable. There's lots of people in this community, in various communities, debating on the importance of LDL, meaning like, oh, is it causal? Does it LDL in and of itself, does it cause heart disease? That's very hotly debated in the community, between various communities. But like, either way, if we just step back for a second, heart disease is LDL cholesterol, or more specifically atherogenic particles or ApoB containing particles. It is that cholesterol plus inflammation that leads to heart disease. Like, that is irrefutable. So what we are doing if we are ignoring LDL on a very low carb diet, we have really, really high LDL, we are ignoring one half that equation. And once again, you are an autonomous adult. You can do that. You can make that. But if we are doing that, we better make sure our inflammation is in check. All the things related to that: blood pressure, blood sugar, all forms of stress. And I kind of use this Tinder and fire example as to why this is not my preferred dietary pattern. And spoiler alert, not my preferred diet. But when you do this diet, you're putting all of your eggs in one basket, metaphorically speaking. You are banking that you will never have any sort of inflammation in your body that could cause heart disease. You're saying that regardless of, the stress in your life, the genetics or other environmental stressors or exposures, that you're betting that you will never reach any significant level of inflammation in your body to drive heart disease, right? Because if you have, let's say, a pile of tinder, right? So you have super dry tinder directly next to a pile of matches. You're correct in saying that that fire will never start if the matches and the tinder never mix. That is correct. But what if you randomly start throwing objects at the matches, like metal objects at the matches? Is it possible that one would start up? Yeah, that's possible. And in this example, the tinder is your LDL cholesterol, right? So that's kind of like the stuff that makes the inflammation go. And the matches are the inflammation. And the objects being thrown at the matches are life stressors, environmental exposures, toxins, bad genetics, and lots of other things out of your control. And my question for everyone is, are you willing to risk that? Are you willing to say, hey, I'm okay, I feel like I can control every variable in my life, and I will never have any worry about insulin resistance or inflammation or blood pressure or anything like that. I can control it by my diet alone. And if you are, that's fine. There's no judgment here. But for me, the calculus just isn't worth it. And that's mainly because I believe that we can have all the outcomes we want from the diet, meaning we can have good cholesterol levels, good blood pressure, good blood sugars, good body composition, all those things by following a multitude of different diets and not putting all our eggs into one basket. That is me specifically. Also, I think there's a robust amount of literature saying that vegetables, fruits, nuts, and seeds can be healthy, and ignoring them is not necessary. And overall, I think that that's kind of my approach to this, is just putting all my eggs in one basket. I understand for some people, they've tried literally everything else. I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. Nothing's worked, this is the only thing that's ever worked. Okay, then it's time to have a conversation. Say, hey, do the risks outweigh the benefits? And that's a conversation, a nuanced conversation to have with your physician, and understand that, not just listen to some person on the internet who said you should try this thing and go there. That's a conversation that we should have. It's a back and forth, right? If you just listen to someone on the internet, we'll talk about that in a bit. But overall, though, that's my general approach, but there may be a time to try the extreme. In cases like intense autoimmune conditions, elimination diets do have some potential mechanism. Some people have had really good success with that. And that being said, though, people of the whole food plant-based diet, the keto, the paleo diet, all have said they've had reversal of their conditions with diet. So which diet is it? And for me, I want to look at the big pictures, right? What do these diets have in common, right? What does the carnivore have with all these other health promoting diets? Well, more than you probably think. They really help control calories, number one, and maintain a healthy body weight and composition. 2, it focuses on minimally processed foods with no added sugar. 3, there's going to be no sugar sweetened beverages. And 4, helps promote weight loss, like I mentioned, very important there. And overall, maybe eliminating some irritating things. The whole idea of like autoimmunity in food is it's a really cool area of discussion and research right now. Don't have a lot of fantastic literature, but some people have had amazing success with their autoimmune conditions by changing their diet. So that's kind of the things we think about. But for some people, this is for them like the last stop, saying, hey, I had all these things. This is the only diet that's worked for me. And so I think a lot of times people get caught in between, right? I always say, here's where we know from medical literature, this is a patient's experience. And this area in between is this gray zone. That's where everyone lives. Most people live in the gray zone, meaning the data doesn't necessarily say it, but we feel this same thing here. People in diets say, hey, I have this autoimmune condition and I've eaten this diet and I feel so much better. But where's the data saying it? It's not necessarily there, but anecdote is reasonable as well in those situations where we don't have robust literature. For me, as long as we are not being taken advantage of financially, right? Saying, hey, like someone's selling you a detox for thousands of dollars a month, I don't think it's worth it at all. As long as that's happening and we're not having adverse outcomes. And that's where we talk about with this diet, with the LDL cholesterol, like, is it long-term going to have consequences? I don't know. I'm not sure. And so that's why for me, it's hedging our bets where, when I try something anecdotally, is it relatively affordable, not going to break the bank for you? Is it safe? Those are the 2 things I have to ask every single time and then have that discussion. And so I started this one because I had a family member who said, hey, I have, family member who did this. What do I do? Like, what do I do? Right. And so first of all, like, just take a breath. It's a diet, right? People get up in arms about this, and it's not like we're torturing puppies or anything like that. It's just a diet. It's not a moral failing. It doesn't make someone good or bad because they interpret data in a different way or choose to do something differently. The same section, this same section in this video could apply to any dietary pattern, whether that's keto, whole food, plant-based, macros. It's just training now to talk about carnivore. And heck, at the end of the day, they could be right. People talking about the LDL issue may not be the most important thing. I think there's a lot of evidence they have to overcome. But I think if you have a completely closed mind saying the book is closed on everything, then we'll kind of understand. And when I say that, I just want to step back saying the idea that LDL in and of itself in a certain subset of people, so people who are very metabolically healthy, their blood pressure is controlled, their blood sugar is controlled, all those things, that's what the argument they're making, that if everything's perfect, LDL doesn't matter. So this conversation doesn't matter for the vast majority of people who have prediabetes or, their blood sugar is messed up, they have hypertension, they have chronic inflammation. Like that does not apply at all. Like, just forget that. I don't want you to listen to this and be like, oh, see, LDL doesn't matter, he's confirming. Like, no, that is not the case. It is a very, very, very small subset of people, and you're probably not there. I'm probably not there. Most people are probably not there. So I'm just stepping back there. But that being said, if you are so close-minded to say like, I couldn't be wrong, then I think that's a really bad look. But it's just a diet. Calm down. If you can't make someone change or do something they don't want to do, right? So we can't force them to do it. After all, this is a personal choice. But I understand that you are doing this from a place of love because you care and appreciate that person. You care for them and you want them to be healthy. And there are some legit concerns to this, right? When someone's bucking traditional trends and doing something crazy and just saying, hey, going in the opposite direction of what medical advice is sometimes, I understand when people are up in arms about that. And so that's what I think about. But at the end of the day, people are autonomous adults and can do what they want. And the biggest thing is just listening to them, right? That's the most important thing. Lots of people in these communities, they've tried lots of things, right? They feel like they haven't been listened to, or they've been dismissed by the mainstream medicine, or they've been lied to maybe, and they finally found a community of people who get it, right? Who's something that's worked for them. It feels good. So this has to be right. There's a lot of angst against the mainstream medicine, right? And when you pair that with losing weight and feeling better, it's hard to change someone's opinion, saying, hey, like, I tried this mainstream thing, it didn't work. I went complete countercultural, and this is really working for me. So this has to be right. So that's a deep-seated belief based off of lived experience, right? That's very, very strong, and that's hard to talk someone out of that. And that's not our goal. We shouldn't be trying to talk them out of it. I think what's helpful is to ask questions, right? This is how I pretty much talk to everybody. When I want to get to the basis of their beliefs, essentially motivational interviewing as a physician, I try to think, hey, where do these beliefs come from? Questions are a good way to probe and find out their reasons why, right? Odds are it probably stem from some sort of weight loss, right? And most people said it's been very frustrating. They can't lose weight. And so they finally got a breakthrough there. And then I also asked, like, why do you think this works so well, right? Odds are there's some preconceived notions as to why it works, meaning there's some, magical explanation for meat versus, why meat is better than vegetables and whatnot. Maybe not understanding the whole idea of the caloric intake and whatnot, but can kind of get to the bottom of their epistemology, their thought, or why they came up with their ideas. But at the end of the day, we're asking questions because we genuinely care about people. So it's always to be gentle and kind, right? It's not trying to ask a question to catch someone stumbling and say, hey, I got you. No, you're wrong. Like, that's a fast way to make sure that person doesn't have a conversation with you again. I think it's being gentle and kind. Something like, hey, I just want to make sure you're healthy in the long run is a meaningful statement that's non-judgmental and shows that you care and have concern for them. And one question I'll ask people is like, why do you trust this person? Like, why do you trust this influencer, right? You shouldn't just blindly trust anyone, including me. If you've never heard any of my podcasts before, you shouldn't just be like, hey, who's this guy? But I think if you have someone touting the answer all the time, right? Saying this is the answer, I'll always be skeptical. My general philosophy is trust but verify, meaning do your due diligence as well. And one thing is, if an influencer only talks about that thing, if they are the low carb guy, the carnivore guy, the whole food plant-based guy or girl, then that person's probably not going to be the most honest source of information, just like straight up. I have a philosophy that I've heard is when you're a hammer, everything's a nail, meaning that if you have one solution to every problem, whether that's your specific diet, then you're going to be very biased, and that's not ideal. So if someone's entire income stream is built upon a single idea, and that idea were to stop working, and they'd have financial incentives then to continue doing that thing, to dig their heels in. So even if they're proven wrong, they're saying, hey, my entire livelihood is based off of this. That's not a reason you can't trust someone, meaning, hey, they're the carnivore person, or they're the keto person, or the whole food plant-based person. That's just something to consider, that when you're listening to them, that we may need to consider, hey, where are their biases? Because we all have them, right? I mean, I have biases, that's it. And I'm not going to sit here pretend to be like higher and mighty than anyone. Like, I have my biases. I'm sure I make mistakes. I'm sure I'm wrong on things, and that's the thing. But what I was just caution people is when someone speaks so confidently that they know the answer to the question 100% of the time, just like look back at everyone's track records and how much things change over the years. Science, we learn new things and we have to change our opinions. And being 100% convinced on something, unfortunately, is very popular in social media these days. It conveys trust, right? When someone is confident, it feels like I can trust them. They know what's going on. But I would almost argue the opposite, that the more you know experts in the field, you listen to them talk, they say, we think this, there's probability that. It's just, we understand there's not a whole lot, that we definitively know. And so that's just something to think about. And if you want to send this to someone, I think it'd be helpful. Send them this podcast. I tried here to lay out the pros and cons of the carnivore diet, and, that may be less threatening than a lot of people. I think that's the biggest thing, is so many of these people who have tried something, they've tried so many other things, right? They've tried so many diets and lifestyle changes and failures, and they finally found something that works. And so now they finally found this thing that works, but we have some issues with it, meaning like, the cholesterol levels and whatnot, and different nutritional density and fiber, but they found this thing that works. So they want to try to figure out, how can this fit into my frame of view, right? Like my worldview. Now, like this works for me, so I have to fit everything else into that box. And I just think I want to, just make sure I'm gentle and considerate of people, because these are still people on the other end of this. And they care, they have families, and they want to be alive for kids, and they want what's best for them. So like, that's the thing at the end of the day. We've just like dehumanized people over a screen. You look at me, hear this video or listen to me on the podcast, hopefully that builds a little connection, and because it's a little longer form, but like, we've just become so crazy that my way of thinking has to be right. And we've just trying to fit our worldview into that. And I think that's dangerous. And at the end of the day, these are just people who want to be healthy, and it may look different from you. And I may disagree with a lot of things that they say and think about, and the way they market things. I think they've done a masterful job of being anti-establishment on social media, and shorts have just blown things up. And I think they've done a really good job marketing. But I think at the end of the day, what they preach is not necessarily anything magical. I think it's just kind of the newest way to limit your calories for most people is what's successful. But the overall takeaways for me, though, is that the carnivore diet is a hot new diet that is essentially an elimination diet. It's effective in helping people lose weight, but at the cost of potentially increasing their LDL cholesterol. In reality, though, there's a lot more similarities and differences to other whole food-based diets. It's just more polarizing because of how different it appears. And if you're going to start this diet or any other diet, you just must be fully aware of the risks and understand that, hey, there's risks and benefits that go with everything. You just have to understand that and accept it. So that's pretty much me ranting. This is a podcast of me ranting. These are some of my favorite podcasts. If you enjoy this, let me know. I love ranting. It's my favorite thing. I talk to my learners all the time. And I'm like, well, okay, you open up this can, now I have to do it. We're talking about lifestyle things. And so if you enjoy this, let me know, and I'll do more of these because, I like doing them. But thanks so much for stopping by. I really do appreciate it. If you found this was helpful, if you could share it with someone or leave a 5-star review, that would really mean the world to me. And if you never want to miss a piece of content, please consider signing up for my mailing list. And it's linked in the description below. But that's it for today. Thank you so much. Now get off your phone, go be active. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time.